thinking about, well, the forecast is going to rain, and it'll wait, no big hurry. Of course, who knows? I don't really forecast 2-3 days in the future anymore anyway. So, you know.
Yeah, about fell over one o'clock, they wanted like this morning.
Or what? Well, it used to be. Well, that's like, yeah. King George would flush them in, clear off the drain, and the utility room. $175. Right? I did recommend. Straight into the big metal and then black plastic. The problem is, I'm not sure that looks good unless you're sealed. But there is, it's actually pumped out, so they have a little seal on the furnace itself. I don't know how much TTC. I said $700 an hour with teacher, and they said it's going to be at least $2. You know, sprinkler still have gone up, but they couldn't double the still not that much. Yeah, but yeah, and he was here before I was. It was an 8 o'clock appointment. I drive up, I can see his Jeep over there. I'm like, wait a minute. But he is starting work over there because that's a remote battery powered sprinkler, which I didn't even know about until I
There you go, they have one out there.
Right?
I didn't even know there was one out there.
There's only 2 zones.
Good morning and welcome. Welcome to this virtual and in-person service of the Idaho Falls.
The speaker should be more directly.
Like right there. Okay.
Barely hear you.
Welcome to this virtual and in-person service of the Idaho Falls Unitarian Universalist Church on this 30th of April, 2023. I am Ron Goen. I will be assisting Reverend Kevin in the service this morning, and Vic Allen is our technical person, and Jessica is at the piano. If you are watching online, please sign into the chat box, and so we may know who all is attending, and also you can enter joys or concerns that we will announce a little bit later on. If you have joys and concerns here, there are slips of paper back in the corner over there to write them on. The other thing is silence your cell phones. I think mine is silenced, I hope. Are there any announcements from anyone? I don't think so. All right. Yes, if you have joys or concerns, please write them on the slips over there. And now, let us prepare ourselves for worship, calm our hearts, our minds, our breathing, and I will ring the peace bowl 3 times. Breathe deeply in and out, listening to your breath as I ring the peace bowl. We will now begin our service with Our church's covenant helps us to remember why we are a part of this faith and why we give our time and our resources to this congregation. If you so choose, please recite along with me the covenant that this congregation has chosen to live by. Love is the spirit of this community, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Well, we will now light the chalice. The chalice lighting is accompanied by the words from Eduardo Galeano. Each person shines with his own or her own light. No two flames are alike. There are big flames and little flames, flames of every color. Some people's flames are so still they don't even flicker in the wind, while others have wild flames that fill the air with sparks. Some foolish flames neither burn nor shed light, but others blaze with life so fiercely that you can't look at them without blinking. And if you approach, you shine in the fire.
Good morning. Our call to worship this morning is the poem Where We Are Before Rain by John Grimm. Where we are before rain, waiting for water, patiently as water moves with being, may I be a bird winged, swooping to drink, feed, sing. Each being in relationship flies, flows, crawls toward what matters. We often say entangled. How did our ancestors name that? Harmony, flourishing, sacred place of my shedding. I invite you now to rise in body or spirit and join in singing our opening hymn, number 175, We Celebrate the Web of Life.
Good morning. This morning's A Time for All Ages is the story of the fire race. It's a Karuk coyote tale, and the Karuk Native Americans are from Northern California.
Can you get a little bit closer to
I sure can.
just tip it down towards your mouth? Directional.
This old story was retold by Jonathan London and illustrated by Sylvia Long. Long ago, the animal people had no fire. Day and night, They huddled in their houses in the dark, ate their food uncooked. In the winter, they were so cold, icicles hung from their fur. Oh, they were miserable. Then, one day, wise old Coyote gathered everybody together. "We've heard about fire," he said, "but the only fire is far upriver at the world's end. It's guarded by the Yellow Jacket sisters, high atop a snowy mountain. They're wicked, and they will not share it. But listen, if we all cooperate and work together, we can steal the fire." Now, there was much fearful murmuring about those Yellow Jacket sisters, but all grew quiet as Coyote told them his plan. Then he went on his way. Grandfather Coyote slowly trudged up the mountain at the world's end. When he at last came to the Yellow Jacket's house, the smoke was rising from the smoke hole. And you have to look very carefully to find the Yellow Jacket's house, way at the top of the mountain. Coyote looked inside. The three old sisters were sitting around the fire. Coyote said, just as friendly as could be, "If you let me in, I'll make you all look pretty." Suspicious, the three sisters put their heads close together and buzzed. "Come in," they said, "but no tricks." Now, we know a lot about Coyote. Old Man Coyote sat down and took a chunk of oak bark between his toes and held it in the fire. When it had burned into a blackened coal, he marked their yellow faces and bodies with black stripes to make them pretty. "Now," said Coyote, "if you close your eyes, I will make you even prettier." Here was Coyote's chance. While the Yellow Jacket's eyes were closed, he took the charred oak in his teeth, and silent as the moon in the sky, he crept outside. Then he raced down the mountain like the wind. When the Yellow Jacket sisters found out Coyote had tricked them, they were screaming mad. They too flew like the wind, and it wasn't long until they caught up to Coyote. They were almost on him when Coyote tripped and rolled downhill like a snowball and landed smack at Eagle's feet. Snatching the glowing coal in his talons, Eagle spread his wings and took to the sky. Eagle was swift, but the Yellow Jacket soon caught up with him. Suddenly, Eagle dropped the coal. Below, Mountain Lion caught it in his great teeth and bounded off through the snow. Still, the furious Yellow Jackets followed. Just as they were about to sting Mountain Lion, Fox snatched the fiery coal and bounced in among the tall cedar and the pine. Fox ran and ran until she was so tired she could not take another step. She huffed and puffed. Her breath made clouds, and the Yellow Jackets were right behind her. Just in time, Bear took the fire and lunged away through some brambles. Bear, too, was quick, yet the Yellow Jackets were right on top of her. Even Bear could not fight them off, and she finally tumbled in exhaustion. As Bear fell, Measuring Worm, the long one, took the fire. The long one stretched way out over 3 ridges, yet the Yellow Jackets were there, waiting, ready to strike. Somehow, right under the Yellow Jackets' eyes, Turtle sneaked in and grabbed the fire and scrambled off. But of course, Turtle was slow, and one of the Yellow Jackets stung him in his tail. Ow! Turtle pulled in his head and legs and flip-flopped down the hill. Flump, flump, flump. The Yellow Jackets were swarming all over Turtle when Frog leapt out of the river and swallowed the fire in one gulp. The frog hopped back into the river, plop, and sat on the bottom. The Yellow Jackets stormed the river, circling once, circling twice, circling 3 times, buzzing the surface. They waited, and they waited, and they waited, but Frog held the fire and his breath. Finally, the Yellow Jackets gave up and flew back home. As soon as the Yellow Jacket sisters were gone, Frog burst out of the water and spat the hot coal into the roots of a willow growing along the river. The tree swallowed the fire, and the animal people did not know what to do. Then, once again, Coyote came along, and the animal people said, "Grandfather, you must show us how to get the fire from the willow." So Old Man Coyote, who is very wise and knows these things, said, "Ha!" And he showed them how to rub 2 willow sticks together over dry moss to make a fire. From that time on, the people have known how to coax fire from the wood in order to keep warm and to cook their food. And at night, in the seasons of cold, they have sat in a circle around their fires and listened as the elders told the old stories. And so it is, even to this day. I see one child, so we will now sing out the children.
And now, Reverend Kevin will light a candle for joys and concerns as I read them. We have one from Victoria. Like that. We have two joys and concerns, the joys from Victoria. Two musical events yesterday, the Metropolitan Opera Champion, about the inner life of a black boxer. And she says, modern with persons.
Percy. Yes, indeed. That's how we talk nowadays, unfortunately.
I didn't quite understand
I
that.
know.
And last night, the wonderful symphony, Beethoven's Ninth. It was incredible. We are so lucky to have such wonderful musical talent. It was an outstanding performance. The final symphony of the year, actually. From Arthur, we were sad to hear that longtime member of this church, Tom Eddy, passed away last week in Naples, Florida. They were longtime members here. Lived in Idaho Falls for a long time. From Karen, a joy, John Tanner's birthday is today, suggesting that he's 93 today. Vic, are there any joys and concerns in the chat box?
Yeah, there is this morning. We've got two from Adam Goodwin. His first is a joy that today is finally spring. And he also has a concern that his amazing wife Olivia has lost her job recently. And so she is looking for suitable employment.
And we will light one additional candle for those joys or concerns that are held in our hearts.
Our reading this morning is from an article titled "The World's Oldest Story." Astronomers say global myths about seven sister stars may reach back 100,000 years, by Ray Norris on the website theconversation.com on December 21st, 2020. And it'll explain the image on the cover of the order of service this morning. In the northern sky in December is a beautiful cluster of stars known as the Pleiades, or Seven Sisters. Look carefully and you will probably count 6 stars. So why do we say there are 7 of them? Many cultures around the world refer to the Pleiades as Seven Sisters and also tell quite similar stories about them. After studying the motion of the stars very closely, we believe these stories may date back 100,000 years to a time when the constellation looked quite different. In Greek mythology, the Pleiades were the 7 daughters of the Titan Atlas. He was forced to hold up the sky for eternity and was therefore unable to protect his daughters. To save the sisters from the lascivious hunter Orion, Zeus transformed them into stars. But the story says one sister fell in love with a mortal and went into hiding, which is why we only see 6 stars. A similar story is found among Aboriginal groups across Australia. In many Australian Aboriginal cultures, the Pleiades are a group of young girls and are often associated with sacred women's ceremonies and stories. The Pleiades are also important as an element of Aboriginal calendars and astronomy. And for several groups, their first rising at dawn marks the start of winter. One Australian Aboriginal interpretation of the constellation Orion from the Yolngu people of northern Australia imagines the three stars of Orion's belt as three young men who went fishing in a canoe and caught a forbidden kingfish represented by the Orion Nebula. Close to the seven sisters in the sky is the constellation Orion, which is often called the saucepan in Australia. In Greek mythology, Orion is a hunter. This constellation is often a hunter in Aboriginal cultures or a group of lusty young men. The writer and anthropologist Daisy Bates reported people in Central Australia regarded Orion as a, quote, hunter of women, and specifically of the women in the Pleiades. Many Aboriginal stories say the boys or man in Orion are chasing the seven sisters, and one of the sisters has died or is in hiding, or is too young, or has been abducted, so only, again, 6 are visible. Similar lost Pleiad stories are found in European, African, Asian, Indonesian, Native American, and Aboriginal Australian cultures. Many cultures regard the cluster as having 7 stars, but acknowledge only 6 are normally visible. And then they have a story to explain why the 7th is invisible. How come the Australian Aboriginal stories are so similar to the Greek ones? Anthropologists used to think that Europeans might have brought the Greek story to Australia, where it was adapted by Aboriginal people for their own purposes. But the Aboriginal stories seem to be much, much older than European contact. And there was little contact between most Australian Aboriginal cultures and the rest of the world for at least 50,000 years. So why do they share the same stories? All modern humans are descended from people who lived in Africa before they began their long migrations to the far corners of the globe about 100,000 years ago. Could these stories of the 7 sisters be so old? Did all humans carry these stories with them as they traveled to Australia, Europe, and Asia? 100,000 years ago, the star Pleione was a bit farther away from Atlas, making it much easier to see. Careful measurement with the Gaia Space Telescope and others show the stars of the Pleiades are slowly moving in the sky. One star, Pleione, is now so close to the star Atlas, they look like a single star to the naked eye. But if we take what we know about the movement of the stars and rewind 100,000 years, Pleione was much farther from Atlas and would have been easily visible from the naked eye. So 100,000 years ago, most people really would have seen 7 stars in the cluster. We believe this movement of the stars can help explain 2 puzzles: the similarity of Greek and Aboriginal stories about these stars, and the fact so many cultures call the cluster 7 sisters, even though we only see 6 stars today. Is it possible the stories of the 7 sisters in Orion are so old our ancestors were telling these stories to each other around campfires in Africa 100,000 years ago? An offering to support the mission of this church will now be given and gratefully received. The title of my sermon today, I've Got That Really Old-Time Religion in My Heart, is in part a tribute to one of my great uncles, Hurtist Millsap, who composed the gospel song you just heard. He wrote I've Got That Old-Time Religion in My Heart 83 years ago in 1940. My great uncle Hurtist, who passed in 1975, was a lifelong Methodist, an excellent musician, and a modest composer of hymns whose primary income came from being a piano tuner of some renown. He tuned pianos for many of the popular performers of the mid-20th century, such as Roger Williams, who sometimes flew him to his concert locations in preparation. His most popular hymn was, in fact, I've Got That Old-Time Religion in My Heart. And it has been recorded by a variety of gospel and folk artists through the years, including most recently by Iris DeMent. As you just heard, it is an upbeat, happy little song, and like any good gospel song, its lyrics celebrate traditional beliefs about salvation through Jesus. I asked Jessica to play it as an instrumental because I doubt that the lyrics would appeal to most Unitarian Universalists, even in 1940. But the words to the hymn's chorus actually speak well to my topic today. It goes, I've got that old-time religion in my heart, it's way down inside. That said, the old-time religion I want to talk about this morning is not the 2,000-year-old Christianity that my great uncle Hurtist embraced, but something much, much older. What I'm talking about is the first evidence of religion in human evolution, which occurred at least 100,000 years ago, and how it points to an ancient impulse to connect with the sacredness of the earth and cosmos that lies deep within the human heart and psyche, something way down inside each of us. We can only speculate about when our oldest human or Australopithecine ancestors first gazed at the world or the heavens with a feeling of awe and wonder that could be described as spiritual, since any archaeological evidence for something we could describe as religion would not appear until much later, possibly millions of years later. I think of that wonderful Dawn of Man sequence at the beginning of the classic movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, featuring an Australopithecine who Arthur C. Clarke names Moonwatcher in his book. The novel explores more of the inner world of Moonwatcher than you can reveal in a film format with a non-verbal species. And in the novel, we first meet Moonwatcher disposing of his father's dead body with little fanfare, leaving it for the scavengers to consume. Clarke writes that Moonwatcher never thought of his father again. Clearly, this was long before funeral rituals or even self-reflection about our own mortality. But Clarke describes Moonwatcher as one who would gaze in curiosity and wonder at the night sky. He was considered a genius among his band of Australopithecines, even before an alien monolith shows up to apparently give them an evolutionary boost on the road to humanity. It is a great work of science fiction and a great film, and I find it quite easy to imagine such thoughts and feelings would have become common as our ancestors' pre-human brains grew larger and more complex. Even watching our dog Atka gaze at birds outside a window or at animals on some television program, I can see there is tremendous curiosity going on inside of her cute little lemon-sized brain. At some early point in our journey to Homo sapiens sapiens, something we could call spirituality must have evolved long before any sort of religious rituals emerged to celebrate and acknowledge these spiritual feelings. Performing a ritual burial or making art to express spiritual feelings required a certain level of sophistication and complexity of thought. But we are learning that it occurred much earlier than we used to imagine. So let's begin a journey backwards in time. There's plenty of debate among archaeologists and anthropologists about what counts as evidence of prehistoric or Paleolithic religion. But it is generally accepted that what we could call organized religion dates to around 11,000 years ago in the ancient Near East, long before any of the world's great religions were even imagined. It corresponds to the time as known as the Neolithic Revolution, when human societies began transitioning from hunter-gatherer culture to more settled agricultural societies in several places around the globe. Humans and earlier hominins had long gathered wild species of wheat, barley, and other cereals, along with legumes and other plants to complement the meat in their diets. So they were cognizant of seasonal vegetation patterns and may have even begun rudimentary agricultural practices shortly after the last glacial maximum, roughly 20,000 years ago. Before about 11,000 years ago, humans were primarily nomadic hunter-gatherers who followed the migration of their game species and sought out more favorable environments as the seasons changed, harvesting local plants as they traveled. Recent archaeological evidence discovered in Israel, for example, indicates that hunter-gatherers were using stone tools to gather wild cereals in the region as early as 23,000 years ago. And it would not be surprising if they learned how to embrace the seasonal supply, to enhance the seasonal supply, by planting seeds in anticipation of their return to the area in following months. As the glaciers receded, there is evidence of some year-round settlement patterns in favorable locations by about 14,000 years ago. But even then, bands of humans were known to travel extensively in search of wild game and for commodities like obsidian to make tools. When bands encountered each other, it could end in violence, or it could present opportunities for trade or even intermarriage. In his book, Guns, Germs, and Steel, Jared Diamond suggests that practicing some early form of organized religion may have evolved as a means of creating bonds between unrelated individuals and reducing antagonism between different bands of humans, leading to the formation of tribes. Over time, it appears that certain ceremonial locations developed, such as the Göbekli Tepe site in modern Turkey, which has been called the world's oldest temple. So far, the archaeology suggests that hunter-gatherers began constructing and using this ceremonial site as early as 9,500 BCE and continued until at least 8,000 BCE. And it is likely that it was a regular meeting place for the bands of nomadic humans living in the region even earlier. There is little evidence of a permanent human population, and the structures seem to be impractical for anything but ceremonial purposes. The circular structures at the site contain a number of large stone megaliths, which were decorated with carved animals and human figures, as well as abstract pictographs suggesting some kind of animistic religion, which we would expect for the period, probably including celebrating the sun and the moon, the seasonal cycles of nature, and fertility. And I have an example on the altar this morning of it's a souvenir version of the megaliths with the jaguar carved onto it, if you want to check it out after the service. Some archaeologists and historians now believe the agricultural revolution and transition to permanent settlements may have been precipitated by the development of organized religious sites, rather than vice versa, as previously thought. But this is still hotly debated. Only about 5% of Göbekli Tepe has been excavated since its discovery, so there will likely be many more revelations in coming years. Continuing our exploration backwards in time, We come to the era of cave paintings and some carvings by our human and Neanderthal ancestors, which often feature beautiful depictions of animals in addition to human handprints and effigies, and sometimes enigmatic symbols. We can't say for certain that all of these works of art had a sacred purpose, but in many cases, both the content and their location deep within the recesses of caves suggest this is the case. The spectacular cave paintings in the Lascaux cave, for example, which have been dated to around 17,000 years ago, are believed to be an example of a kind of sacred hunting magic, a means of invoking the spiritual realm to ensure successful hunts. Many of the cave paintings are even older, with the oldest discovered to date being in Indonesia. There, in around 300 caves, there are depictions of warty pigs and human handprints that have been reliably dated to at least 45,500 years old. And researchers suggest they could possibly be as much as 65,000 years old. When you consider the age and location so far from the human migration out of Africa, these paintings provide remarkable evidence of a very ancient human symbolic thinking, artistic capabilities, and spirituality. Like Göbekli Tepe, the research is still in the early stages, so there will be likely to be many more amazing discoveries to follow from this area. Now we come to the most ancient archaeological evidence of religion: burial rituals. It seems obvious that feelings of grief, reflection on our own mortality, and speculation about what might come after death have been common to the human experience for as long as our brains have had the capacity to have such thoughts and emotions. Feelings of grief have become recognized even among some of our non-human relatives. When someone dies, we mourn. And though other funeral practices like cremation have emerged over time, one of the ways people have long started to deal with their grief is by ritually returning the body of a loved one to the earth. There's an obvious practical component to doing so, but there's also a spiritual recognition of our sacred connection to the earth from which we arose and to which we return. Several very old burial sites have been discovered in recent decades, including an adult burial at the Kafza cave in modern Israel and an infant burial at the Didiria cave in modern Syria, which are both believed to be from the Middle Paleolithic era, around 80 to 100,000 years ago. Another child burial of a 2.5 to 3-year-old discovered in a cave in Kenya has been dated to around 78,000 years ago. Unlike later ritual burials that often included grave goods and practices like decorating the bodies with red ochre or flowers, these early burials display evidence of the careful positioning of the body before burial. Children are sometimes placed in a fetal position, and in some cases bodies were dismembered and then deliberately placed in an anatomical position. We can only speculate about the spirituality of those who buried these people and what rituals they may have performed, but it seems clear that they were interred with love and tenderness. I would not be surprised if even more ancient burials were discovered in the future. At this point in our journey backwards in time becomes even more speculative. The archaeology we know to date can show us evidence of religion to about 100,000 years ago, but can we push the date even earlier? From the fossil evidence, it is believed that the human capacity for language is at least 150,000 to 200,000 years old. And it seems reasonable to assume religious practices that require a degree of symbolic thinking and social expression probably required language as a fundamental component. As I said earlier, it is possible that spiritual feelings were present even in our pre-human ancestors millions of years ago. But I can't imagine how we could ever prove it. But given our human nature, I think it is plausible to suggest that once we developed language, it wasn't long before storytelling emerged, and sacred stories would have been important early on. One can imagine small bands of hunter-gatherers around a campfire telling stories about their origins or why things are the way they are, or looking up at the night sky and recounting mythical stories about ancestors, spirits, or gods. And as our reading this morning suggests, it is possible that some of these very ancient stories have been handed down in various forms even to modern times. Carl Jung proposed the idea that similarities among the present world religions were a manifestation of what he called the collective unconscious, which was at least partially genetically inherited phenomenon. Out of this collective unconscious, we inherit archetypes that show up in our myths and legends and help shape our concepts of morality and social identity. Though I personally find the concept of archetypes very compelling, it is hard for me to conceive of something that reflects symbolic thinking as having a biological genetic origin. I find it more reasonable to think about this possible transmission of ancient stories down through generations, even in very subtle ways, as a potential source of such archetypes manifesting in diverse cultures around the world. The stories inevitably evolve through generations of retelling and translations through different cultural lenses, but something ancient and resilient remains. Maybe the archetypes that influence our modern spirituality are analogous to a kind of mitochondrial DNA that reflects most ancient spirituality of our ancestors, the most ancient spirituality. It would certainly explain why so many people these days are rediscovering the spirituality of a profound feeling of connection with nature and the interdependent web of all existence. Maybe our innate human attraction to nature and other living beings that Edward O. Wilson called biophilia is a reflection of our ancestors' early understanding of being born into a world of relationships and learning the importance of acknowledging an eco-spiritual identity. Over hundreds of millennia, the human imagination has evolved to explore the cosmos through science and philosophy, and we have created a beautiful tapestry of spiritual ideas to explain our place and find meaning within it. Whether it is genetic or somehow embedded in our psyches through ancient stories, I believe we inherited at least some of our spirituality from very ancient sources, and it rests somewhere way down inside. As this so-called Earth Month of April comes to a close, nature is reawakening all around us, inviting us to tap into the wisdom and feelings of our ancestors and reconnect with the earth. We are the result of an estimated 10 to 12,000 generations of humans who came before us, each seeking answers about the cosmos and the meaning of existence. Let us bask in wonder and awe and celebrate our humanity and connection with the web of life as our kind has done for a very long time. I invite you now to rise and body your spirit again and join in singing our closing hymn, number 173, In the Branches of the Forest.
Shore
Our closing words are from the book Earth Prayers, edited by Elizabeth Roberts and Elias Amadon. To the ancients, as well as many contemporary seekers, the world is alive with spirit. The surrounding landscape is infused with creativity and meaning, and each place speaks to us of the divine. This notion of a richly sacralized world may seem strange to mainstream Western culture. We live in a secular landscape. We've been taught to identify the sacred with cathedrals, churches, and temples. The rest of the earth is considered real estate, a mere it to be used as a resource for our benefit. This effort to desacralize the world, dispel its sacred aura, is what made possible our commercial relationship with the land. It has allowed us to plunder the natural world, destroying places of more power and beauty than we will ever be able to recreate. If we have a wonderful sense of the divine, it's because we live among such awesome magnificence. As the Passionist priest Thomas Berry observes, if we lived on the moon, our mind and our emotions, our speech, our imagination, our sense of the divine would all reflect the desolation of the lunar landscape. Clearly, the earth is our primary revelatory environment. Our most sacred scripture is the holy book of nature.
We will now extinguish the flame. Please join with me in reading the words for extinguishing the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.